Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I am so excited to show you this technique. This technique combines my two passions, which are cake design and acrylic art. I've been wanting to combine the two together and I wasn't sure how to do it, been thinking about it for a long time, and then I saw a post on Instagram, and I will tag the original artist, and seeing how they did it, or that they did it, gave me a visual and I figured out how to do it. So if you want to learn how to do this, please stick around. So before we do anything with the cake, we need to first make the art, the painting, basically. So what I'm using here is 1/4 inch foam board, and then I'm using some of this clear contact paper. And as I go along, I will describe to you more what I'm using this for. But what we need to make is basically a mirror glaze. That's what we're going to use as our edible medium. So what I'm doing there is I'm just putting some gelatin into a bowl of warm water. I will attach the recipe down below. But I am blooming the gelatin and then just setting that aside while I prepare the rest of this. Now this is made with gelatin and it's made with white chocolate, and it's very good. So I'm combining some sugar, some water, and some sweetened condensed milk. We're just going to whisk that all together, and then we're going to bring it to a simmer. Once you start getting bubbles on the surface, then you're going to turn your heat off, remove it from the heat, and add your bloomed gelatin into that mixture. And just whisk it together until your gelatin has completely dissolved into the rest of it. And then I went ahead and I melted my chocolate. That's not in the recipe, the original recipe done by Chell Sweets, but I found that it's a little easier to get your chocolate completely melted down and not waste any of the chocolate when you combine the two together. So if you mix it in your melt it in your microwave in about 60-second spurts on 70% heat, and then mix it together, it will combine a little easier. And then you're just going to strain it into your sieve to get any remaining chunks out. And see, there's just very few of them. Now cover that up with saran wrap and set it to the side because we're not quite ready for that yet. And what I'm doing is I am cutting down some acetate sheets. That is what is going to help us transfer our art onto the cake. Now I did 2 different cakes. That's why you'll see some extra pieces of the acetate sheets. I filmed them at the same time, but I'm only going to show you this cake on this one. So I just removed the marker from the acetate sheet so that that's not getting transferred onto your cake. And I measured the width around the cake and the height, and I cut these pieces down to size so that it will wrap around the cake, because we're basically doing a wrap. That's how we're going to attach it to the cake. And then I just used some fondant, some black fondant. You can roll this fairly thin, because I know a lot of people don't like to use fondant, but for this technique, you kind of have to. At least that I found. The technique I came up with, you do kind of need that fondant. So I'm just cutting these pieces down to size. And then just brushing off that extra cornstarch and setting it to the side. And then roll out your other piece that is going to wrap around the sides of the cake. Like I said, you can go ahead and roll it fairly thin, since you're going to have help with the acetate sheets and transferring it onto your cake. It doesn't need to be real thick. And I'm just brushing on some shortening. Don't worry about putting shortening on your fondant, because fondant actually has shortening in it when you're conditioning it. You have to add shortening to give it that elasticity. So if you do a thin layer, it's going to absorb into that fondant. It's fine. You're not going to notice the taste. And then I put the acetate sheet on top of it. There's a lot of steps in this, I'm not going to lie. This is not a simple, quick technique, but I promise it is well worth the work. And I'm just removing, there's air bubbles out of there. You don't have to do that. I'm kind of a perfectionist. It's really not going to matter, but I can't help myself. And then just cut the excess off around that sheet. Since that sheet is cut to the size of the cake, you don't need that extra fondant. And I do add a few inches to the circumference of the acetate sheet to give you a little leeway. So now we've got our mirror glaze. I had melted it down to a more pouring consistency, and I'm adding my colors. Now, typically when you do a mirror glaze, you don't want to pour it until, okay, let me explain this real quick too. This is how I'm going to do that, the cell technique with the gold. I just used some piping gel mixed with some gold luster dust and then melted down. That's how I get that technique. But you want your mirror glaze to be at about between 100 and 110 degrees when you're pouring this. Now just watch how I'm doing this. It's easier to show it than to explain what I'm doing in some things. And I have a lot to say. So yeah, you want it to be a little thinner. Since you are doing a pour technique, you need it to have some flow. Now this mirror glaze is a lot like acrylic pouring. The difference to me, all the techniques work the same, but the difference to me is that it's a little thicker, a little stickier, and it gets sticky faster. You have more working time with acrylic, so don't go too slow with this. And then you can actually even use your torch to remove the bubbles, the air bubbles, just like with acrylic. I'm just amazed on how much this is just like acrylic. And what this actually is, it's called a ghost swipe in the acrylic pour world. There are so many different techniques on how to do this, and I'm so excited to do different techniques. But I started with this one, and you can see that it's thickening up as I'm working with it. So remember, just work faster than you do with acrylic paint if that's what you normally work with. And then I'm just kind of fine-tuning it, adding some of the, I want to say paint, some more of the mirror glaze here and there. I wanted this to be abstract. Of course, every time you do acrylic painting, acrylic pouring, or this technique, it's going to end up different every single time. So don't see a picture and think you're going to be able to replicate it exactly, because I promise you, you won't. It's going to be your creation. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of moving it around a little bit because I didn't want it to be a straight line. I wanted it to have some movement. And then go ahead and remove some of those, more of those air bubbles, and see how that gold gives you those cells. I think that is just fantastic. But to emphasize some cells, you can use the torch. That, just like with the acrylic painting, it gives you those cells. It's really cool. And then I'm just fine-tuning, removing some of the little accidents, and go ahead and put some on your top piece also. And then once you have these where you want them, put them in your freezer. You're gonna need a bigger freezer. I wouldn't do this technique for anything larger than a 6-inch, honestly, unless you have a really big freezer or you don't mind doing it in sections. You need to put it in your freezer for at least overnight. At least overnight. And you'll see why in a second here. You don't see me, this is the next day. And then I have already crumb-coated cake with some chocolate ganache. You can do this on ganache, or you can do it on buttercream. The other one I did is on buttercream, and it works for both of them. And then to get the pieces stuck on, I used some piping gel, some more piping gel that was thinned down just a little bit. You don't have to thin it down. Mine was just getting thicker. So I thinned it down and just brushed it on. Now you're gonna go ahead and cut, kind of score along the sides of your piece, just so that you can remove it from the board. And then go ahead and lift it on up and move the board out of your way. And then this piece, I added shortening to the back of it. Add a thin layer of shortening and then stick it to the front and flip it over, remove the piece from the back, and that's how you're gonna wrap it around your cake. If you do not add that shortening, your mirror glaze will stick to that acetate sheet, and that ruins the whole thing. So go ahead and make sure you get a good layer of shortening on there. And when you peel it away, it peels away. It's wonderful. And I'm just cutting off the excess piece right there. I'm making sure to use my acetate sheet to do the fine tuning before. Don't use your fondant smoother on the mirror glaze because it won't go well. But yeah, the trick to that is making sure that it sets up at least overnight. If you touch your mirror glaze and it doesn't stick to your finger and it's kind of firm, then it's ready to be transferred onto your cake, at least overnight. You could even do it 2 days in advance. It will be just fine. And then I just went ahead and I made some chocolate spheres, and I just used some styrofoam balls to dip them in chocolate. And I'm gonna airbrush them later, but this is funny. For this topper, I used a balloon. I added cold water to it, and I'm pouring some isomalt made from scratch over the top to create the topper. Now, since there's cold water in that balloon, it won't pop it. And then set that to the side to firm up, or to cool down. And I will add a link to that recipe in the description as well. Now, this is the part. I had to include it. It got absolutely everywhere. It was such a mess. I did 2 of them, and this is how you should do it. Don't use an X-Acto knife right away. Poke a hole with a pin. And then use your X-Acto knife to make that hole a little bigger and squeeze that water out of that balloon. And it will release fairly easily. And just set that to the side until you're ready to attach it to your cake as well. But I did, before I used it, I sprayed it with some confectioner's glaze. Confectioner's glaze is another thing that helps get you that glossy look for this whole look. You don't have to do it on the cake itself, but I went ahead and added a layer of the confectioner's glaze on top of the mirror glaze as well, just to make it extra specially shiny. I like my acrylic art to be very glossy. You don't have to. If you like more of a satin look, that's fine too. You don't have to do this step. And I'm just using a sponge I've only used for cakes to kind of spread that around a little bit, and then did another layer after that dried. Now I'm just attaching this to the top, and it stuck to the mirror glaze on the top, but I added one of the spheres on behind it to anchor it down. And then I just kind of arranged those spheres the way I thought looked pretty. And then I used some of those gold dragées that I showed earlier. I got that really neat kit. I will add that in the description box too, where to get that. With all those different sizes and shapes of dragées, gold dragées. And just add those where you want. You don't even have to add those if you don't want to. I just thought it added to it and kind of tied the whole thing together. And they will stick to the mirror glaze even with the confectioner's glaze on there. So there you go, guys. My edible acrylic art mirror glaze cake. I hope you like this as much as I enjoyed doing it. And like I said, I will have another one being posted in probably a week and a half, 2 weeks. Different technique, same look, and different colors. So I hope you liked it, and I hope you give it a try. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch my video. And if you'd like to watch some other videos, go ahead and click on the link to one of these other videos shown here. And if you would like to check out my other social media, I am on Facebook and Instagram under the same name, Sophisticakes by Mary. And please take the time to share, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you know when I upload another video. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you on the next tutorial.